Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Mosaic Podcast. Every episode is really touching me in a way that is deeper and deeper. And I'm so excited about this podcast because Adrienne had me on her podcast. And I've done a lot of podcasts, and I don't know if it was just something in the makeup of who we are together. And I've just met this woman, and yet I feel like she's a sister from a long time ago. I feel very in tune with her. Um, and something came out in the podcast that we did together that I can't wait for you to hear her podcast, um, which is which is that's Aloud Podcast. Okay. My my notes were behind my picture here. Um, and she has a beautiful podcast called That's Aloud Podcast. And in that podcast that will be coming out sometime in June with me on it, somehow she brought out in me exactly what I wanted to bring out in the presentations that I do, which is not so much telling my story, but telling the stories of the people that I've met along the road, telling stories of the people that have been on my podcast, because it's in the collective knowledge of all of us together that I feel something really special happens. So you're definitely going to want to sign up and subscribe to That's Allowed Podcast, which is her podcast. But let me sort of introduce you to the woman that's in front of me. Dr. Adrienne MacIain is a professional storytelling coach. Did I say your name wrong?
Yeah, so
Okay.
no one ever gets it right on the first try. It's so sneaky.
So let's say it again. You say it for me.
So it's Dr. Adrienne MacIain. That's a
MacIain.
capital I. I know you would never guess.
MacIain. Oh my
Yeah.
God. Okay. So we're going to leave this in because I think I did a podcast with someone who is called the Failure Coach, and he said failure is just perfect to do. So
Absolutely.
I didn't ask her ahead of time because I was so sure it was McClain. So it's not
Right.
McClain, it's MacIain.
Mhm.
So Dr. Adrienne MacIain
Mhm.
is a professional storytelling coach. She's a brand aligner, a podcaster, a published author, and a content creator who delights in using her PhD in drama to help people spin this mucky straw of life experience into a narrative gold. She's the creator and host of the That's Allowed podcast, which we've spoken about, which you should subscribe to right now, where she uses her unique story discernment process to help folks tell the stories they're not telling. Video game fans may recognize her as the voice of multiple characters from the Nancy Drew Her, capital Her, interactive series, Artemis from the Super Monday Night Combat, or Nina and Bonnibel from Crush Crush. She has the coolest thing that I've seen for her links, which will be in the show notes, which is a link tree. And you can just look on the tree and click on the place you want to go to, and it will take you right there. And so you'll see that in the show notes. The URL for that is link tree with a dot between the R and the EE / That's Allowed. But you'll see all that. You don't need to do it. Adrienne, welcome to the Mosaic Podcast. What a joy to have you on my show.
Thank you so much, Danny. I just want to reiterate, I feel the same way. I feel like we've known each other longer than we've known each other, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it has to, because we know each other all of about 18 minutes or something, right?
Yeah, something like that.
But and that to me is the beauty of the world we live in. And even for me, when I'm narcissistic and I just talk about the mosaic, there are these connections that we have that we don't even realize we have. They may only be just tiny connections or look like they're tiny connections, but we're completely connected to people that we never even knew we were connected to. And that happens. The fact that someone can meet someone and in the first moments feel just an incredibly deep connection with them, or the opposite way. Sometimes you walk into a room and you feel really like that person is bad news and I don't want to be around them. So it can't be that what we see is just happening right here. So
Oh, absolutely. You've just inspired me to tell a little story. Can I do that?
Please, please, please.
So my husband David, I knew him for about 4 years, and we never connected. We knew each other through a mutual friend, and we would go to the same party every year on the same date, which is Boxing Day, the day after
Uh-huh.
Christmas. And he was always busy in the kitchen, and I was always out being the little social butterfly, talking to everybody. And a couple of times I kind of tried to strike up conversation with him. It didn't go anywhere. And it was like he literally was in a shadow. I could not see him there. I thought he looked different than he looks. Like, I thought he had brown hair and brown eyes. He has blonde hair and blue eyes. Like,
Wow.
weird stuff. And then one day, one year on the Boxing Day,
Yeah.
I'm there and I look at him and he looks at me, and it literally was like a door opened for the first time and we actually saw each other. And it
Wow.
was instantaneous,
Wow.
where I looked into him and he looked into me, and we saw each other the way we wanted to be seen and had never been seen before. And we instantly were like, you're it. I love you. Let's
Wow.
do this. And it was
Wow.
that fast.
So normally I start off totally differently, but the beautiful thing about my podcast is it doesn't matter what normal is. Okay.
Right, right.
And so you just hit on a pivot point that I would really like to burrow down into and try and understand.
Absolutely.
Because I bet there are so many people that are listening now that have either a similar experience or an experience where something happens and a veil gets lifted and they suddenly see somebody like they never
Mhm.
saw them before. Certainly in my book, The Mosaic, that's what happened when I went looking for heaven. And
Yeah.
the characters that I met, I thought, why am I sitting with them? They're just a homeless guy and a street person and
Mhm.
artist, right? And all those things. But then when I took some time and spent time with them and listened to their stories, I saw them completely differently.
Yeah.
So what I want to try and see is if you have any insight or if we can try and flush out in our conversation right now,
Yeah.
what happens in
Mhm.
that moment where he went from
Yeah.
being a brown-eyed, brown-haired guy, which he never was, right?
Which he never was.
To a blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy who suddenly saw you and you saw him.
Yeah.
What changed in that moment that allowed you to do that?
Okay, so several things. The first thing is he had gotten to, that place of rock bottom where you just get to this place where you're like, there's nowhere to go but up from here. He had this experience where he had given up. He was literally, his truck was packed. He was going to leave the next day. He was going to drive to Idaho and drink himself to death. That was his plan.
Wow.
And so he was at this place where he had no hope left that his life was going to get better than it was. Similarly, I was in a place where I was in this just dead end relationship, which was really dysfunctional and messed up and abusive and everything else. And I had finally let go of it. But I had this kind of weight on me of feeling like, okay, now I have all this work that I'm going to have to do on myself to be worthy of a healthy relationship. I had this idea that I was going to have to be alone for a long time to fix myself and go through all of this. And I think because we had both gotten to this place of letting go of what we thought we were supposed to be doing,
Mm-hmm.
and the future was now suddenly open. There was a possibility there that we had never seen before because we had never allowed ourselves to see it, because we were so focused on what we thought was supposed to be our direction, what we thought
So,
was supposed to be
so
our
pause for a
lives.
minute because I already hear my mind going, and I don't mean to interrupt, but
Yeah,
his future was not open from what you're saying. He had his truck packed and he was driving and he was going to drink himself to death.
right.
So that doesn't sound like a future that was open. That sounded like a future that was closed.
I
So
hear, yeah,
what
but I think,
what happened in that moment that
yeah, yeah, it
and
changed that.
again, let me put this into the context of what we're talking about through the whole podcast here. We're talking about the power of story,
Yeah.
right? And so listen to how the story changed from
Mm-hmm.
just a moment in time where one story was, it's going to take me forever to find somebody. I'm going to have to do a lot of work on myself. Another story changed from, I'm just done with this. I give up. I'm going to drink myself to death. I'm taking all my things so I'm not a burden to anybody, packing them in a truck, and I'm going to be found dead on the side of the road somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
To a story of being at a party and seeing somebody, and instantly both those stories changing.
Yeah. And I think what it was is, like I said, just that availability of possibility, because we had let go of everything else. And
So
so then
jump
there
in.
we were
That's what
facing each other.
that's what I don't understand. Where is the availability of possibility? How did
When
that
we
come
look,
up?
when we looked at each other
Okay,
in
bam,
that moment,
bam.
and there was this, it literally felt to me, I keep saying literally, it actually felt to me like the universe had been kind of waiting on something, and it was like it had shifted just enough, and all of a sudden all the little keys were able to fall into place that had been waiting.
Yeah.
And we had been, pushing and pushing, and I kept saying, I'm ready, like, where is my love, where is, why is this not happening for me? And him, the same thing, he's like, I'm waiting for this person who I know is going to change my world. Where is she? Why is this not happening for me?
I love this story, and thank you for letting me push you, because as soon as something happened there, that I just got it. And
Yeah.
it so resonates with something I say to people all the time. If you look at a mosaic, in the
Mm-hmm.
actual artistry of a mosaic, the pieces that surround you open up to a whole nother part of a mosaic. So
Mm-hmm.
we're literally one piece away in the
Yeah.
artistry of a mosaic from an entirely new world, because we're surrounded by these
Yes.
pieces, right?
Yes.
And that one piece can open up if we use it as a bridge or a doorway or a tunnel or whatever we want to use it as, rather than a wall that surrounds us. If we allow those pieces to connect us to the pieces that they're connected to, suddenly in one moment that changes.
Yeah.
So I love that. And I also love how the power of a story in 1 second
Mm-hmm.
can disintegrate because a new story comes in that makes more sense.
Yeah. And the thing is, I think we both had to let go of a lot of story before that moment for
Yeah.
that to be possible. And like you said, you were saying when you were on my podcast that we have to let go of things before we can kind of uh, get what we need back. And I think that was and is the problem that a lot of people have. I know it was the problem that I had, that I was not willing to give up what I had because I was too scared. I
Yeah.
didn't think I could find something better. And so I held on to this thing that I knew wasn't right for me for a very long time, and tried to fix it and tried to work on it over and over again. And when I was finally genuinely ready to let it go, that was when I was finally able to move forward and find something new. But we have this idea that, oh, I'll just find that new thing while I hold on to this old thing. And it
Yeah.
never works that way.
Yeah. So I bet there's nobody listening to the podcast that has that same experience. BS.
Not a single
I
person.
mean, and I want you now, as you're listening to this podcast, as a listener, to ask yourself, what stories are you holding on to so strongly that are not necessarily bringing you the joy and happiness that you want, but you're scared to death to let them go because you don't know what the void in between the space of letting it go and the new story coming in will do.
Yeah.
And so for you who've done that, and something just popped up in my head, because I know that I said we need to let go of something to allow something new to come in. And yet intuitively, in time, and I'm lobbing this up to you to see, because I'm sure it's wrong from what you're saying to me, but it just feels intuitively that I have to ask you, were you and he really ready to let go of those stories, or did something happen that was so powerful that actually in that moment made you see something that allowed you to surrender into the new story?
Yeah, I think that's what it is. I think that neither of us had ever had that experience of actually being seen.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean by that?
I love what I know what you mean by that, but I would love you to explain it to people who have never been seen, who have possibly never
Yeah.
been seen on the podcast. What does that mean to be really seen?
Often when we look at someone else, what we're really looking at is kind of a distorted mirror.
Mhm.
We're projecting our own insecurities or fears or whatever it is onto someone else. And very rarely, and it's beautiful when this is able to happen, we are able to actually see someone for the beautiful entity that they actually are. And we are able to be seen just as a pure kind of energy, not necessarily a bunch of personality traits, right?
Yeah.
And that was kind of the purity of that moment, is we were able to kind of see past all of the stories that we'd heard about each other and all of the expectations that we had of each other. And we're able to say, oh, you're not any of those things, are you?
Hmm.
You're this beautiful creature that's hiding in there and is so scared to come out.
Yeah.
And we just wanted, I wanted so much in that moment to just make that little creature feel so comfortable and so loved that it was just able to come out fully.
So let me ask you something, because as you're saying it, I understand that the little creature you're talking to is the man who now became your husband.
Yeah.
But I wonder if there wasn't another little creature that you saw in that mirror that you wanted to let out as well and allow that person to be loved as well. Was there another creature in there?
Well, I think part of it too is seeing yourself reflected there as you
Bam,
actually want to be.
bam.
That I could see the person that I was going to be with him,
Yeah,
and I loved her,
yeah.
and I wanted to be her and be with her.
So say that again slowly, because that's so powerful.
Yeah.
Because so oftentimes we think we have to do something to help somebody else be something. And so often it's just, in my experience of working with people at least,
Mm-hmm.
is that when we suddenly make a shift in what we see in ourselves, in your case, when we suddenly see that person that we want to be and
Yeah.
how enjoyable this person seeing us in that way makes us feel,
Mm-hmm.
the world we see suddenly becomes entirely different.
Yeah.
Does that make sense to you?
Yes. And just the when he looked at me and I saw him love me
Hmm.
right where I was. And I thought, oh, I can be a person who is loved.
Yeah. Wow.
That that was the whole thing.
I know that place because um, when I met my wife, Anna, I
Mm-hmm.
was a few days away from I was looking for a 3-star cave in the Himalayas where I was going to go and spend the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm.
I had given up on life. Everything that I wanted, I'd already achieved. I was frustrated by the life that I was living and didn't see the quality or caliber of people around me that I wanted to be around. And suddenly she came into my life. And I was also at a low point in my life. My business had failed. I was $300,000 in debt.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to get away from it. My world had crashed in on me. And she came in that moment. And I said to her, uh, and and she said, I've never felt what I feel with you with anybody else. And I said, how is that possible? I'm at the lowest possible point that I've ever been at. How
Mm-hmm.
is it possible for you to love me in this point? And she said to me, no one's ever asked me why I love him or how I can love him. I love you because I love you, and that's what I feel. And I can't stop that feeling, no matter if you have millions of dollars or you have not, you owe millions of dollars. It doesn't matter to me, right?
Yeah.
It's just, I love you because we're supposed to be together. And I didn't feel it the way she felt it at first.
Mm-hmm.
But that feeling was so contagious and so, um, I felt like I felt I was empowered to do anything in the world, that with her love I could do and be anything.
Yeah.
So finish out the story. You felt that with each other.
We felt that with each other.
And then what happened?
And it's a funny thing because, like you said, he was kind of at his lowest point. He was in a lot of debt. Things were not good for him. And slowly but surely together, we have been building our way out of that. And he has blossomed in so many ways. He's now running a successful business. He is stronger than he's ever been in his life before. And I know it's because I was able to love him exactly where he was at.
Yeah.
He was able to accept himself where he was at and then grow from there, because we can't start from anywhere but where we are.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
So when you look at the work that you do now, which is helping people tell their stories and not be scared to tell their stories.
Right. Which, by the way, I was not doing when I met him.
Okay.
I was working a job that I did not like, that I wasn't particularly good at. I was an executive assistant, and it's a very detail-oriented, repetitive job. And that is not where I thrive, and that is not where I shine. And so I was spending more and more focus on the relationship and less focus on this job that I really didn't care about.
Right,
and that
of
started
course.
to show. And so I lost that job, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. And he encouraged me to start doing what I was intended to do and to use my actual gifts in the world. And it was the best decision I ever made.
And so in some ways, I can hear people saying, well, yeah, she made that change because she didn't like what she was doing. She had a new situation come in. You know, she had somebody who was encouraging her. But for those people who are out there now that you work with, or that come into your orbit, that probably have exactly that same situation, but want to make an excuse around the fact that they don't, you know,
Sure.
that
Yeah.
I can't do that because I don't hate my job that much, or I don't have
Oh
someone
yeah, there's always a
supporting
reason. I
me,
mean,
or
I had to, I was convinced that I had to stay in that job because my health insurance is what my daughter was using.
yeah,
And if I didn't have health insurance, then my daughter wouldn't have health insurance. Well, guess what? I asked her stepmom, do you think you can get her on your insurance policy? Surprise, she can. The end. It was that
yeah,
easy.
yeah. And I don't mean to go political here, but like, just we're in an election year, and I'm not wanting to get into election year, but this idea of healthcare and how healthcare should,
Mm-hmm.
how much it in some ways we think it's this greatest thing that's ever happened because we get it through our employment, but in some ways it binds us to something that's no longer ours because we're scared to death that we won't be able to cover the expenses of an emergency situation on our kids. And it
That's
really
right.
is, I'm just going to stand and rant for 1 minute, it really is time
Mm-hmm.
for our country, America, the United States of America, to have universal health care where we take care of our people. It's not a privilege, it's a right. It's end of rant.
Yep.
Okay.
My parents are European. I spent a lot of time in Europe growing up, and I've always just been shocked and horrified that we don't take care of our citizens the way other Western
Yeah.
cultures do.
So
And
let's not rabbit hole there, because I just rabbit holed.
yeah.
And sorry to take it away from that. Um, so how did you realize what was your purpose to do? How did
Mm,
how did you get to that place?
that's a great question. It was a process. I will say it actually took several years and different mentors uh, for me to kind of get to what the essence of my gift really is. At first I was like, okay, so it's something creative. You know, I knew I needed to be creating something. And I told you I have a PhD in theater. I knew that I was an actress and that was kind of important to me. But I also was a writer and I loved writing. And I just had all these kind of disparate talents, and I didn't really know what was the core that bound them together. And so I did some work where I was just kind of looking at, all right, if you left me alone to my own devices, took money out of the equation, took everything out of the equation, what would I do with my time and why?
Mhm.
And I realized that what it was is I would, if I was just left to my own devices, I would be interacting with people, telling my stories and getting them to tell me their stories.
Mm.
And why? Because stories, as it turns out, is what we're here for. I asked my mom one time, I love this. I asked my mom, who has a master's in divinity, why do you think God made humans? And she said, funny thing, God actually told us.
Mm.
He says in the Bible, I made humans because I love stories.
Mm.
And that just made me so happy to hear that,
Mm.
because I've always felt that we are here to create stories and to share those stories with each other. And so
So,
I think that's, yeah.
so tell me why that's so, like, I never heard that about God, and it makes sense, but I never heard it before. But tell me why it's so important for you to be able to tell your story and to be able to help another person tell their story. Why is that such an important thing?
Part of it is that I think there are some stories, experiences that I had, especially when I was really young, that were very dark and confusing to me, and I locked them away pretty tightly in my subconscious, in my little box,
Yeah.
and they affected me in ways that I was not aware of for a very long time.
Jump into that. How did those stories affect you in ways that you weren't aware of now that you are aware of them?
Yeah. So I was molested when I was about 4 by a woman who lived in our house. She was a renter. And it was weird stuff. I won't get into the details because it's gross and dark.
Right.
But it was really upsetting what she did. And as a little kid, I had no way to process any of it.
Yeah.
And I had no understanding that it was not okay, or that what was happening to me was not my fault. And so I understood from a very young age that I was there to please other people in whatever way they needed,
Wow.
whatever way they needed, no matter how uncomfortable it made me, no matter how painful it was, no matter how difficult it made my life. I was there to please other people.
Hmm.
And that played itself out over and over and over in my life, to the point where I found myself in an abusive marriage where I was almost killed several times.
Wow.
And I just put up with it because I thought I was there to relieve his pain, that
Understood.
was my purpose.
There's so much power in what you're saying right now, and I think anybody listening can feel that power.
Yeah.
So now walk across the bridge with me.
Yeah.
How in
So,
telling that story does that change the story, or to give light to the story, or make you not somebody now who has to please everybody, but stands on your own as who you are for what you are and what you do?
right. What I realized was that by telling that story and unpacking that and seeing myself as a character in this story, I was able to see my role as, no, I was not, that's not what I was put on this earth for. I was able to reframe it as, no, this was something that happened for me. I don't say to me, it happened for me, so that I someday could unpack that and recognize, no, this woman was in pain. This woman was doing this to me because probably someone did the same thing to her when she was a little girl. And so she's playing out these patterns. We play out these little patterns in our minds. And so when I look at that story and I go, oh, that's sad
Right.
that this woman had to do that to a little girl. And I understand now from an adult's perspective, looking at that little girl that was me, what was put onto me and how I learned that. I'm able to unpack that and go, oh, but I don't want that to be my story. I don't want to be the people pleaser who just puts up with everyone's crazy patterns. I want to help people And sometimes the help is stopping that pattern by saying, I'm not going to participate in this anymore. I'm going to separate myself from that story.
So stay with me a little bit, because
Yeah.
I get that, and I want to go underneath that a little bit.
Yeah, let's do it.
I had a woman on the podcast I think her podcast just came out a few weeks ago, and we're in now middle of May. So her name is Michelle Watson, and Michelle
Okay.
Watson is a Christian. So I was wondering how this is all going to work, because I'm okay with everybody, but I don't know, sometimes they're not okay with me. But she had so many different major things happen to her wrong. Bad things happened to her. I mean, her body was the playing field for all the stories that she had happened to her come together and just beat her up. And
Yeah.
I mean, she had major surgeries and major diseases and pains and migraine headaches and all these things that went on.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened for her was, when she was able to tell that story, when she was able to get it out from inside of her, because she
Mm-hmm.
had been hiding it for all that time. And she didn't even have to take there was one story she only told to one person, because she doesn't feel comfortable yet telling the story. But even in telling it to one person, it allowed that to come out of her and not just be stuck in her.
Yeah.
And she had miraculous healings happen as a result of that.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that you're sort of hinting at here with what you're saying? Because what I'm trying to get at is how like, I understand the psychology of looking at the story and rewriting the story, but
Yeah.
you're really saying something else. I thought you're really
Yeah.
saying it's in telling the story and in rewriting the story that you create a story that's truer to yourself.
Yes. And by, like you said, these stories, when they take up residence inside of us, they live in there and they affect things. And when you're able to bring them out, they can live outside of you and they can actually do good in the world and help other people who are stuck in similar situations.
Love it.
When they're caught up inside of you, they're not doing anybody any good. In fact, they're probably doing you some harm that you're not even aware of.
So, Adrienne, why don't people tell their stories? What are we so ashamed of? Because, like,
Yeah,
what is
that's the word, shame. It's shame. We are afraid that we're not good enough. We are afraid that we brought this on ourselves somehow, that it was our fault, or that we should have somehow stopped it. And so I think it's embarrassing to people, and they are ashamed, and they don't want to tell this story because it casts them in the light of a victim, and nobody wants to think of themselves as a victim. And so it's really that reframing of it. Like I said, if you're able to look at it not as something that happened to you, but something that happened for you, as a
Yeah.
lesson that you then can learn and then teach other people.
So, in essence, what I hear, and I think it changed from what I thought you did originally when we sat
Mm,
down,
okay.
is you not only help people tell their stories, you help people reframe their stories and tell their stories. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
you help people get to underneath the story that is limiting them,
Hmm.
reframe that story so that they're actually telling the story of who they are at this moment, which could then change again to another story,
Which it will.
which will
Which
open
it
up
will.
another, right? Okay.
Yeah, and also just seeing the meaning of that story for other people, seeing that that story isn't just for you. In fact, it's not for you anymore because it already happened to you. You
Beautiful.
already experienced it. Now it's a story for someone else that needs needs to hear that and needs to be inspired and motivated by it.
Yeah. One of the things that happened in my life, which was really interesting, was um, I was friends with a general manager of a big hotel in Phoenix,
Hmm.
and he moved to become the general manager of a hotel in Maui. Um, and he called me. I wrote him just saying, "Congratulations on the move. I'm so happy you're in Maui. What a cool place to be." And I had signed it. At that point, I had just changed my profession from um, whatever I was doing before to being a thought coach. And I just was trying out the sign of a thought coach, the signature thought coach. It was the first email I put it on.
Mm-hmm.
And he called me up instantly. Like it couldn't have been 3 minutes between the time I emailed him and the time he called me back. And he said, "What the hell is a thought coach?"
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Well, I think that what happens is the things we think become the things that we say, that become the stories we tell, and become the life that we live."
Yeah.
And he said, "Okay, I want you to write the story of our hotel." And I said, "Well, that would be cool, but what is the story of your hotel?" He said, "No, we don't have one." And so I ended up writing a book based on the core values of the hotel of their company,
Yeah.
creating characters and I created a love story.
Mm.
And in the story, one of the characters was the guy that every guy wants to be. He was the best at archery. He was the best kayaker. He was the best swimmer. He was the most charismatic. He was the head warrior. He and so I ended that chapter by saying, and every night he went home with another woman on the island because all the women wanted to be with him.
Mm-hmm.
And they looked at me and they said, "Whoa, Danny, I love what you've created here, but you can't. This is a hotel. We can't have that be our reputation. That's not." And I went, "Oh my God, how stupid of me to even think that."
Right.
I changed 10 words of it. And I said, "That's easy to fix. Let me just fix it." And I wrote, "Every night, though he could have gone home with any woman on the island because they all wanted to be with him, he couldn't wait to get home to the woman that he longed to be with."
Mm.
And they said,
Now we're talking.
now that's it." And
Yeah.
so sometimes it's just a slight adjustment to the stories we tell
Mm-hmm.
that actually hit on the truth of the situation rather
Yes.
than what we've been told the truth of the situation is.
Well, it's like that one word that we change. This happened to me versus this happened for me. It's one
Yeah,
word, and yet
yeah,
it changes the meaning of the whole thing.
yeah,
And sometimes just adding, and that's great, can change the entire story that you just told to yourself. Like,
yeah.
oh, I'm so stressed out. I've got so much going on today. And that's great.
That's right.
And I
Right.
love that.
I think there's some sort of game that we used to play that we used to say a sentence and then we would close final words of the sentence was "in bed."
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And it just
Absolutely.
so it made something normal like this. Everybody would laugh around what we would write. So let's get into it a little bit.
Yeah.
So who are the type of people that come to you
Hmm.
to have a reframe?
Most of the people who come to me are entrepreneurs or solopreneurs who are trying to rebrand. They're looking at their branding and going, this doesn't actually reflect who I am. This isn't in alignment with my values and what I want to put out in the world. So that's the majority of the people who come to me. But what I love is when people come to me because they have a story, a personal story that they know they need to tell, and they just need a little bit of help getting it reframed for them and getting it out into the world. I've only had a couple of those clients and they are my favorites.
So in other words, if someone would like to give a TED talk or something like that,
Yes.
would
Or
those be
write their
people?
memoir. That's the kind of thing that I absolutely love. When I work with entrepreneurs and solopreneurs, mostly I work with them on their about, like their about page, because I want to get at that origin story, that kind of core story that tells people who they are and what they're about. And so that's how I kind of get at it there. But what I absolutely love is when someone comes to me and says, I want to write my memoir, or I need to tell this story, or I'm giving a speech. And then I can really get at, okay, what is the meaning of this for the people that you're telling it to? How can we find the beginning, middle, and end that really pack a punch for that audience, for that meaning to really land
Love that.
there?
So I love where you went with it because in writing the about page,
Mm-hmm.
suddenly when the person I'm guessing this, tell me if it's true or not. Um, when we change the way we view ourselves and we write our about page differently,
Mm-hmm.
then everything, I think Wayne Dyer said, when we change the way we see the world we see changes.
Yes.
And so is that suddenly where the misalignment comes, when they realize that their about is not really the about of who they are? And then
Yeah.
what they have to do is realign their company to the new about page? Is that sort of how it happens?
Yeah. And it's a funny thing. Most people, they think, okay, I have this brand and now I have to align myself and my company to this brand. I need to get the culture to align behind this brand that I've created. No, it's the opposite. Your brand needs to be a reflection of your company and your culture and your values, your actual values.
Yeah. Which
Not,
is really you,
yes,
right?
yes.
So I've done a lot of work with CEOs.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I was really somewhat surprised by is when I asked them, do you feel that your voice has been heard? Because one of the things I'm thinking of doing is going on the road and filming people whose voices haven't been heard to
Yes.
create a documentary.
Which, by the way, I'm so excited to watch.
Thank you. And I initially thought that was going to be the homeless and the downtrodden. But when I sat with CEOs and asked them, do you feel like your voice is heard? Most of them say, no, no way. It's, you know, the saying, it's lonely at the top. We can't actually say what we actually feel.
Yes.
So how does a company develop an atmosphere of trust, or a culture of trust, when their CEO can't say what he really wants to say and
That's right.
isn't telling his story
Yes.
in a
And
way that
isn't being
aligns?
transparent. Yeah.
So do
Transparency
you
is
work with
so
CEOs?
important.
Do you work with
So,
CEOs and companies too? Would you like to do that type of work with them?
yes. And as I said, I was an executive assistant. And the thing that I loved about being an executive assistant was being able to hear their voice and translate it and get it out to the rest of the company and the world. Because, like you said, they often feel like they're locked up in this little tower and no one really knows what's going on with them. And I felt like it was my job to transmute that through the whole company so that they had transparency to know what is the CEO thinking, what are they wanting, what's going on with them. Because if they have the same information that the CEO has, they can all make decisions like a CEO makes,
You're
and you have a
beautiful.
much stronger company.
So I get in the personal development person that there's been
Mm-hmm.
abuse, or there's been death, or there's been pain, and there's been that makes us
Sure.
not, it makes us ashamed to tell our story.
Yeah.
What is it in the corporate world? Is it those same things? Is what is
It's
it in the
fear of failure. It's fear of failure. It's fear of not being professional enough. It's fear of being chastised by you know, your peers. Everyone wants to look good in front of other people. And especially when you get to the top, you're afraid of losing your position. You're afraid of taking a risk because then you might lose everything you've built and you've worked so hard for by taking a wrong step or saying something that upsets people.
So stay with me, because I'm trying to get underneath all that, because that all
Yeah.
makes so much sense, okay? But I'm trying to understand, why in the whole world of things that we believe
Mm-hmm.
have we all grown up with this story of fear of failure, fear of
Mm-hmm.
not being good enough, fear of not being successful, when they're
Yeah.
equally on the same, if you just turn the coin over almost, there's this wonder of what would happen when we're vulnerable and open, wonder what would happen when we get out of the same trap that we're in. How did this story get cast so succinctly and so powerfully that makes us all scared to be ourselves? Why would that story take hold when there's no truth to the story?
I think it's just we've attached it to survival, you know? We're afraid of death. That's the bottom line, right? We're
Well,
afraid of that
so
unknown
walk it back with me.
void.
We're scared of
Yeah.
death. We're scared of the
Uh-huh.
unknown. So then what? Why? So what then? What does that make us do?
So we know we need to survive, and to survive, we often need to collaborate and interact with other people. And so we need those people to want to collaborate and interact with us. We need them to trust us. We need them to think well of us. If they don't, then we could be out on our own. We could be, as you said, living in a cave by ourselves, trying to,
Right.
you know, and survival gets very difficult under
Yeah.
those circumstances. But I
So
don't think it's conscious. I don't think it's
right,
conscious. I think
I
it's,
agree.
yeah.
So I want to ask people that are listening, how much does this make like complete sense to you? And if it does, how do we turn this around? Because
Mm-hmm.
what ends up happening, and we see this in our civilization, we protect ourselves with stories that we hope people will like us by telling.
Mm-hmm.
But we
Mm-hmm.
never, but they become walls around us that isolate us from having the one
Ah,
thing we really want, which is the intimacy and connection and love and feeling. Because what ends up happening is even when we fall in love, oftentimes it's one wall falling in love with another wall. It's
yes.
it's not us there because we haven't come out of that
Ah,
fortress, and we haven't shown ourselves to be ourselves. How does that have sustainability? What have you found in your storytelling work with people
mhm.
that has allowed them to confront that situation and slowly bring down those walls, or quickly bring down those walls,
Ah, Danny,
and
thank
show
you
up in
so
front of
much.
people?
Thank you so much for asking this question. This is the question I have been wanting someone to ask me, and I didn't know it until this moment.
Good.
Thank you. Everything we want is on the other side of our fear. And so, what I do is I encourage people to go into that place of fear. What are you so afraid of? What are you so afraid of in telling this story? Why are you afraid to tell people this story? Let's find that and then go into it, lean into that, and recognize that the character that you're creating of yourself is flawed, is beautifully flawed. No good, interesting characters are perfect,
Right.
right? When
Right.
you read books, do you want to read about someone who's perfect and does everything right? Yawn. Nobody
Right.
cares. Nobody wants to read that story. They want to know how you're like them, and they are flawed. And so you need to show those beautiful flaws. And this was the struggle that I had in writing my own memoir, that I was so afraid of letting people see all of the terrible decisions that I had made to lead me into situation after situation. And so I was trying so hard to polish it up and make it look like, oh well, and then I did this, and but it was because of this, and justifying and rationalizing. And I realized I got to get rid of all of that. I
Yeah.
got to get rid of all of that. I just need to show them what I did and then what I learned.
And so tell us the name of your memoir, because I don't think I
Yeah.
mentioned that.
So it's called Melting Ivory. And it's actually, the bulk of it takes place in Cote d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, when I was there studying on a Fulbright scholarship. And it was a very crazy time in my life. And I grew up really quickly and learned a lot in a very short span of time.
So if you haven't picked it up from her already, there's a couple words that define a person that create a story. Fulbright scholarship is one of those. The woman that we're talking with here, that means she's absolutely brilliant. So if you've had any thought of not believing what she's saying, now add to that the overhead projector sheet of a plastic sheet of Fulbright scholar, which is world acknowledged, a certain caliber of mental capacity. And so,
Here's the thing. Can I tell you something?
please.
It's so funny, and I wrote this in the book. You'll see this if you read it. I didn't know what a Fulbright scholarship was when I applied for it, and if
Wow.
I had known, I would not have had the confidence.
Wow.
I would have thought, no way, this is way too competitive. I'm not a genius. I don't, and so I wouldn't have even bothered. And it was because in my innocence of not knowing how prestigious it was that I was able to just channel an idea and let it come through me and just type it up and send it off, that I was able to get it.
So pause for a minute. Beautiful story. How many times do we stop ourselves as a listening audience because we think the challenges are so big?
Yeah.
And if we would only rewrite that story and just have the innocence of who we are and just put it out there with, if it works, if it's ours, let it
Yeah.
happen. If it doesn't, and look what was possible because Adrienne did that,
Yeah.
and how that became a, a post that she can now define herself around
Right.
in doing it. We've talked about it a little,
Hmm.
but what scares you most about the work you do?
What scares me most about it, there's a couple of things that are coming up when you say that. The first is, like everybody else, scared of failure, scared that I won't make enough money at it. I will have to, eventually get, a day job or a real job or whatever you want to call it. Uh, that I'm just not good enough, or that it's not wanted, that it's not a valuable uh, process to the world. All of those insecurity fears are there. Uh, I'm not so much scared of being vulnerable, because I think I've gotten pretty comfy with that, and I really actually enjoy that process now, of that
Yeah.
feeling of being a little bit scared and vulnerable. I've learned to enjoy that and see that as a marker of, like, oh, this is a good story, keep going. Um, but when I'm working with other people, I have a great responsibility to kind of help them through that, and to recognize the difference between, this is just someone beating themselves up with their own shame or confessing, and reframing that story as something empowering.
Yeah.
And so that's where I really take my job seriously. I am a writer and a coach, but I'm also a therapist in a sense. And so I have to be a balance of all of those three, to be able to let them get that full story out, but also to say, okay, that part of the story, that's for you. This part of the story is for everyone else. Let's shape this.
So, what part of your insecurity, not your lack of vulnerability, because you are vulnerable, what
Yep.
part of your insecurity do you feel is for other people that you, by in telling that story, by in just like walking right through it, just going into that place, acknowledging it, walking through it, no longer letting you limit it? Can you give to other people, which you really are already doing, but you just have
Yeah.
forgotten, you in some ways forgotten to walk
Yeah.
yourself through and do it for yourself as well, right? Which is what we all
It's
do.
so hard. Yeah, it's so hard to take our own advice, right?
Yeah.
This one of my podcasts, and I hope you'll listen to this one. It's with my daughter Aria. She actually is on two different episodes, and in the first episode, she comes up with this wonderful little adage out of nowhere: "Tell the truth first before it gets worse." It
Wow.
even rhymed. I was like, "Wow!" And then in the second story, she's having a hard time telling the truth. And she is really scared about the consequences of coming clean about something she did. And so I was like, hey, do you remember that little adage you came up with? And she was like, no, I don't know what you're talking about.
That's right. That's right. Of course. Of course.
Yeah.
So
And
again,
of course, we all do that. We all do
yeah.
that. And so I think it's just, bravery is not having that fear. It's acknowledging that and going, okay, there it is. There's my insecurity. There's my fear. I'm going to do this anyway.
So one of the beautiful things about a mosaic is, for me, is the idea of what happens when the pieces come together. Some of them are broken, some of them are whole. And it
Yeah.
really doesn't matter if they're broken or whole. When the mosaic comes together, it just creates this beautiful artistry. Nobody really needs to teach anybody anything, or fix anything or change anything. It literally just comes together. So I'm going to do something I haven't ever done on a podcast before.
Yes.
I'm going to invite those people who are listening to really contact Adrienne right now, and to really sit with her, and through the joy of connection, through the joy of allowing her to pull out of you who you are, that you will also at the same time pull out of her insecurities, because she will see that just how easy it is from one podcast to get a group of people to come together to start to work with her and believe in her. And I'm going to ask that your belief in her help her to strengthen her own belief in herself. And I've never done that before, But I feel like there's so much power in what you do that I really want us as a community of people, for those who are listening from now till the end of time, to contact her and let me know what happens. I'd be honored to make that connection,
Thank you. Thank you
because
so much.
that's how important both of your stories are to get out there.
Yeah.
Because we already saw in the middle in right when we were beginning, a story told is not a true story.
Yeah.
A true story told has the power to affect millions of people. An untrue story does too, but the one person it holds back is us.
Yeah. Absolutely.
How do how do people get in touch with you? And then I want to ask you one final. What's the best place for them to find you now
Uh,
that they're going to come all over and get you? How do they
they
find
can
you?
come to my website, which is That's Allowed, and it's ALOUD. That's allowed.com. And there's a contact form on there, and that is the very best way to get a hold of me. And I do free consultations with new clients, and I would love to talk to you and just hear your story and find out who you are and what you're about.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So if you're somebody who has been wanting to have their story, wanting to get to know the story, and don't even know that the story you're telling is the story that really is, please take advantage of that. Okay.
Thank you.
Um, the question I ask everybody at the end of the podcast, and it really is how I ended up being able to tell a lot of those stories on your podcast,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, was, when you look out the window at the world that you see, is this the world you always dreamed of handing over to your children and your children's children?
Hmm. No, no. And that's hard. That's
Yeah.
hard. Speaking of children, this is my daughter.
Oh,
She
hey,
has come to say hello.
hey,
This is
daughter who
Aria.
came to say hello. Hi, Aria.
Hi.
How are you, sweetheart?
Good.
Good. You got a great mom. You know that?
I got a great
Yeah.
kiddo. I'm very lucky.
Uh,
Hmm.
all right. So
But
talk.
I also think that um, it's kind of not up to me to create that world. Do you know what I'm saying? I think it's a group effort, but also she is going to create her own world.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And if we do nothing to the world that we live in, then the momentum of the world we live in will continue to move in the direction it's moving, and it
Right.
will be harder to shift that momentum.
That's
So,
exactly right.
so what would be one thing that you might be able to suggest to people
Mm-hmm.
that you would like and ask them to do today,
Yeah.
that they could do that easily, that would, next time I would ask you that question, say, it's not there yet there, or maybe it is there, but it's getting a whole lot better. I like it
Yeah.
because we shifted something here by just doing this one simple thing. What would that be?
Absolutely. The thing that I would like everyone to do is to talk to someone who you know very well and ask them, what's your story?
Hmm.
And just find out something about them you didn't know, especially if it's someone who's very different from you. I would say someone who maybe is a different religion, from a different culture, someone that you maybe feel like is different from you, but find out what their story is. And I think you'll be surprised at how much you have in common with
Love
that
that.
person.
Love that.
Yeah.
So, all of the show notes, in the show notes, we'll put all the ways to get in contact with her. I want to thank you so much for coming on, being on the show. I love the suggestion you made, and the beauty of asking the same question to a bunch of different people is, I
Yeah.
had someone else say, talk to someone you don't know at all and ask them how they're doing. And Adrienne saying, talk to someone you do know and see how, and ask them to tell their story. I'd like to take a moment and summarize, if I could, and just
Mm-hmm.
one of the reasons why I love the podcast and as a format is that people that I never knew before, I suddenly have a chance to sit and talk to. And we have a chance to interact in a way that allows them to open up and me to open up. And we have suddenly our stories go from being two separate stories to one story. And we start to see all the ways that we are similar, just like Adrienne was saying, when you talk to someone who you know and you ask them what their story is, you might find some things out about them that you didn't know that makes you closer.
Yeah.
But the thing that interests me a lot about this podcast is sort of something that goes back from the ages, which is almost from Socrates, where he said, "Doctor, heal thyself." You know, that we so take care of other people, we so take care of each other, we so that sometimes I was just having this conversation with my wife, where she takes care of everybody so much that the time that's left in the day for her to do something for herself gets diminished. And we just made a pact that we were going to create the space for her to, in the morning, be able to do something that she wanted to do for herself, whether it's go for a run or a walk or just spend time meditating or whatever it was, that she would get that time so that it wasn't at the end of the day searching for it. What also came through in the offer that I invited you all to do is something that I've never done before, which is the power of what we can do as individuals when we come together as a community. When we see somebody that has brilliance and needs our help, why not just come to them for help? They will help us. And if they're helping us, we will help them. And so what I really hope you get from this is, whether it's that you go to Adriana and work with her, or whether you see somebody else who needs your help, offer your help to the people who need your help, not because they need your help, but because it will help you to give to people more than think about what you're going to get back. And when you get back from them, it's beautiful. So I really encourage you to go to her website, contact her, do some work with her, have that first call to see if it's even appropriate. Because I never knew the Bible said God created us so that we can tell our stories. I don't know if it's true or not, but I love the
I don't know. I don't have the verse handy. I'll have to ask Mom from that. But I was like, wow, I hope that's true.
Whether it's true or not, it makes a good byline for us to
absolutely
end this. So I want to thank you again, Adrienne, for coming. I want to thank those of you who listened to listen. And I want to ask you to go back and listen to this slowly. Stop it for a minute and think about, what are the stories you're telling yourself? How would those stories, with just a word or two, change? What are you ashamed of? What are you embarrassed of? What are you scared of? What do you fear? And what are those fears and those shame and those things that you're holding back on, keeping you from having an experience of, that if you experience it, might blow you out of the water? So with that being said, let's tell great stories and drop all the stories that aren't great, so that we can actually improve ourselves again. Thank you again for coming. For those of you who are listening, please rate this, please review it, please, give us your thoughts. This is the way. If you like what we're doing here, please share it with your friends, tell more people about it. Please help other people know about it, because we're having some amazing conversations that need to get out to the world a little more. So I'm asking now for your help in sharing this with other people as well. Thank you again. And until next podcast, we'll stay connected, stay happy, and tell great stories. Ciao.
Ciao.